Thanks, Philip.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the Senate Democratic Caucus. We are here. We've managed to make it through the Ides of March, and here we are all together addressing a lot of the good work of the Senate. I'm Allison Clarkson. I'm the Majority Leader, and we're going to hear about several bills today that are coming up on the floor. We're going to first hear about S101, which is our smart growth and modernization of our municipal bylaws bill. We're then going to hear about a waiting implementation plan in S13. And we're going to hear about Rygate. And if we have any time, we're going to hear about the rental registry health and safety bill. So, but I want to be acknowledge that we have lots of work to do this afternoon. So we're going to end promptly at 1. So first, may I give it to the reporter of S101, our pro tem, Becca Ballant. Senator Ballant, take it away.
Thank you, Senator Clarkson. So I'll just give a quick overview of what this is all about. So S101 is proposing to adopt multiple changes to promote housing choices and opportunities in smart growth areas. So it updates municipal and regional planning, the regional planning fund to allow grants to municipalities to assist them in modernizing their bylaws. It was clear that they needed support around that. It extends downtown and village tax credits to neighborhood development areas. We're trying to really encourage more housing development in these smart growth areas. It's training developers to navigate the permitting process, and it removes the requirement for state water and wastewater permits where the municipality has already issued a permit. Now, I know that you're probably receiving a fair amount of emails on sections 10 and 11, which the chair of SNRE is going to be speaking to in just a moment. But just to sort of give you a broad picture, this bill, for those of you who were in the Senate last year, it is a retooled and slimmed down version of S237, which was the omnibus housing bill that we passed out of the Senate unanimously last year. But in many ways, it is different from that because it really is more of an incentive-based program. It is very different from where we were last time. It does not impose on towns the mandate that they have to do this, but it enables them to take advantage of this grant program. So we know that regulatory changes alone do not create more housing. We also need to provide some tax credits to neighborhood areas and training to help homeowners and small scale developers use the downtown and village tax credits to create more housing. So I am going to just have a quick look and see if there are any other things that I want to touch on. Oh, I guess I should say that, you know, a recent example of why this guidance and zoning modernization really matters is in my hometown of Brattleboro. So leading up to the pandemic, many Vermont municipalities were already discussing the guidance and small changes that they could make to increase the supply and the availability of the housing. And when the pandemic hit, the urgency for more housing, of course, we all saw it, it spiked. So Brattleboro responded to that need by passing temporary bylaws and utilizing money that was provided in the CARES Act. And the result was that we had unprecedented speed in approving the construction of 22 new units throughout the town, which for a town the size of Brattleboro is pretty remarkable. So it proves really that incremental development in existing buildings and neighborhoods is possible if you have the right zoning. And it speaks to the potential of this particular bill and its strategy to create more housing and revitalizing our downtowns and communities. So I do think the bill creates a path for more communities to be able to follow Brattleboro's lead. And I think it makes good sense to reserve the bulk of the time really for the particular provisions of the bill which are causing the most angst and consternation, which are sections 10 and 11. So if it's okay with you, Madam Majority Leader, I'd like to pass it over to Chair Bray.
It is yours, Senator Bray.
Okay.
Sorry, are there any questions for Senator Ballant before we move to sections 10 and 11, the water permitting sections? Are there any sections on what we just talked about? I don't see any. So Senator Bray, it's yours.
Great. So thank you, Senator Ballant. Thank you, Senator Clarkson. I'm happy to contribute. I'll follow up on the line of the theme of the bill itself, which is to promote good development in places that we want to have it done. I think we probably all have a shared goal of regulation should be efficient, transparent, less as inexpensive as possible. So with that, the sections 10 and 11 that are precipitating, bad pun, precipitating emails to people around connecting, making sewer connections and making public potable water connections in development. They do not change the number. So I think the most important thing I can say is they are not going to change the number of connections made. All they do is they change who permits those connections. The rules for guiding whether a connection is allowed, how it's allowed, stay essentially the same. What we have currently is there's a duplication between getting a municipal connection for sewer or drinking water and a state permit for essentially the same thing. And it can hang up projects for weeks and months to get both permits in rows. And yet there's no value in the second level of permitting. It's not that there's additional questions asked and in order to assure that things are done appropriately. So this simply says that a municipality following the same rules as the state, the same criteria as the state in specifying how to connect to drinking water or to a sewer system can issue that permit itself. And that's the extent of what changes. So I know that people are getting emails around so-called combined sewer overflows. But I would just remind people that this does not change the management of any system in a manner that will impact those events, which are, rain driven. So I could go on, but let me just pause there and ask if there's any kind of questions that people have. I'm happy to answer in more detail.
Do we have a question? Senator Bray, Senator Baruth, do you have a question? No.
Right. So again, the CSO events that people hear about, right? There are laws on them. We have reduced the number in the state dramatically. These are very expensive changes to wastewater systems in cities throughout the town. I think that throughout the state, we may have 11 towns where they continue to be a work in progress. To the point that we all wish they didn't happen. Towns have been bonding. Burlington I think is the most recent town. They put up I believe it was a $30 million bond oriented to clean water infrastructure related to wastewater treatment and reusing CSO events. So the limitations on the state making progress on those events is related to the level at which the state overall supports them. It's not a consequence of who permitted the connection to the system. And they're really quite distinct from one another.
Right. Senator Ballant, you were wanting to add something?
Oh, I just, for senators who I know they're gonna go home tonight and they're gonna get more communications on this bill, and we want to do due diligence. Can you Chris, just simply put, I'm sure you're getting some of these emails. What is it fundamentally that is the misunderstanding between what we're trying to do and what the perception is of what we're doing. Just if you could just clarify that one more time for people.
Sure. I think people are worried that towns are going to be granting many more connections than the state would allow, but towns will have the same obligation to make appropriate specifications for connection that the state does. It is no lower standard. The other thing, and it actually has nothing to do with whether it's the state or the municipality that's allowing a connection. Other independent law establishes that you can't add to a system that doesn't have capacity for more connections. And that is distinct from all of this. And that is entirely unchanged by 101.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yep.
Thank you. And do we have any questions on this part of the bill? Okay, I see none. So speak up if I'm missing you waving your hand at me. I just don't see anybody waving. Okay. Oh, McDonald, are you waving your hand?
I am. And the dilemma that we all face, both in the Senate and in the other body, is not caused by this bill, and it's not helped by this bill. But we know that our sewage treatment plants often get inundated by storms, and they put more raw sewage into our rivers. And since we have not come up with a solution, which may or may not include the federal government or may require us to raise more revenues than we are willing to raise, this is going to continue to get worse before it gets better. And we are hooking up more connections to sewage treatment plants, which are experiencing more weather events. And we're not dealing with that. And this bill doesn't deal with it. And some would say it makes it worse and should spur us to deal with the underlying problem. But we're not. This is an easy thing to do, but it doesn't make things better. So, and we should know that, because we don't have any easy choices on this one. And we're probably going to not tackle the big problem now. So we should be straight with one another on that. That's not an endorsement or a critique of moving along and making sure that people that have homes have something to hook up to. So that's it.
Senator Hardy.
Anything further on this? Oh,
yeah,
Senator Hardy.
Thank you. Well, that confuses me, because that contradicts what the chair of Senate Natural Resources just told us, which is that there are a lot of municipalities that have invested, including Burlington's $30 million bond, and that this would not allow a system to add customers or hookups if they don't have the capacity to do so. That's what I heard from Senator Bray. And so that we're not adding to the problem. We may not be solving the bigger problem, but we're not adding to the problem with this provision. So could Senator Bray, can you clarify that or confirm
Sure.
or deny?
I'm the one who brought this up, but there are municipal plants that are unlicensed, whose licenses have expired and not been extended. There are a whole variety of things, and I wasn't picking on any particular town or event, and some places are investing money in their plants and others are not. I'm having been on the committee with Senator Bray, he hasn't misrepresented anything. But so I turn it over to Senator Bray.
Yeah. So I think I appreciate what Senator McDonald is saying. For people who are writing to us, what I think they are mostly writing to us about is they wish we would tackle the bigger problem. And, what would that entail? That might entail tens of millions of dollars more being put out in a revolving loan fund. It is major infrastructure upgrades at the municipal level to wastewater treatment facilities and the collection systems for them. This bill doesn't address that issue. This bill simply says the permitting for making connections is now going to be delegated to municipalities to do work that will be just as stringent as if the state were allowing the connection to be made. I also mentioned that there is state law that says you can't add people to a system if you don't have the capacity to handle them, but that is handle them in dry weather conditions, so that the normal operations are still going to accommodate these new homes or businesses that will be connected. There is, when you get to a heavy rain event, that system is functioning exactly as when it bypasses the wastewater treatment plant and releases untreated water. It's mostly storm water. There is a septage component in it, and that's like the gross factor that makes everyone say, why would we allow that? But those wastewater treatment facilities are really like a giant wet compost pile. They are full of microbes that are digesting everything in there. If you send a tremendous surge of water through, you will scour it out, and just, you will destroy the capacity of that wastewater treatment facility plant to operate. So it's a protective engineering mechanism. It's designed to do a bypass. A couple of years ago, when this came up, I did the math. We've probably all seen over here the manure spreaders, honey wagons, as they're sometimes called. If you picture the largest one you've seen, which is roughly 8,000 gallons, the size of a good-sized fuel truck, the dilution factor, it would be like fill that truck with water, then take a 5-gallon bucket of septage and pour it in. And so that's how much water compared to how much septage there is during one of these CSO events. We would prefer that there be none. We're not condoning the current problems. We're just saying this is a reality of the current system as designed. Stormwater events are more violent, more frequent. CSO events then are triggered. Towns are investing, and we are shortening the list of CSO events project by project, but it will take tens of millions, actually probably well over 100 million to continue to solve all these. And then last, one little nuance, should anyone think, well, you would completely want to separate these two systems. Until the moment that a combined system, in other words, stormwater and septage flow together through an entire collection system to a wastewater treatment, until the moment there's a diversion because of storm levels, you are treating on a daily basis all the storm water that is flowing through. And that storm water picks up all sorts of things all over town, all sorts of things spilled on roads. Every creature that's defecating outside, that it's not clean water. And so there is a valuable function provided by these systems until the moment at which they begin to divert. And it's at that moment, which is a relatively rare thing. It's not a good thing, but it's a relatively rare thing. And to Senator McDonald's point, we're not addressing that one here. So as he said, we should be straight with each other. We're not addressing that. The bill's not intended to address it. And if we really want to make a major commitment on CSO events, we need to look at a very large pool of money for an extended period of time in order to make very costly upgrades around the state where these do happen.
Thank you. And I think just given time, any additional questions, if we could direct them to the reporter of the bill and or to the chair of Senate Natural Resources and Energy, that would be great. I would love to have Senator Perchlik introduce us to the weighting implementation plan in S13. We're going to shift to education. Well, we just got educated about sewer systems and potable water. So, but we're going to continue our education, which is one of the joys of working in the legislature. We're going to continue our education with an education committee bill.
S13. And there's a lot of other senators, in particular the current chair, the former chair, Baruth, and also Senator Hardy have spent a lot of time thinking about this. So I definitely invite them to weigh in on this. But basically, as our current chair likes to ask witnesses, you know, what's the question we're asking or what the problem is that we're trying to solve with this? And basically 2 years ago or 3 years ago, the legislature asked the question, are we accounting for the cost to educate our preschool through 12th grade students accurately and equitably? So that was a question that the legislature asked, and they tried to get that answer by having a study done by UVM. Tammy Colby did this study, which people refer to as the weighting study, which looked at this question. And that legislation had them look at particular costs of like economically disadvantaged students, English language learners, secondary level students. Did we have the current weighting, you know, the formula that we use now in our statewide education formula to deciding that, you know, which is kind of common sense, that to educate a preschooler is not the same cost as educating a high school student. And so our formula already has this equation where we do a multiplier or we weight those students differently. And the study came back and said, no, we're not doing it accurately or equitably. And there's no evidence that the weights that were created back after Act 60, when we switched to a statewide funding formula, nobody could figure out how they even came up with those weights. So the study came back and said, here's a much better way to do the weights. And, you know, we've been talking about that study that came out in December of 19, I think, or December of 18. And the legislature has kind of been looking at how to basically implement those studies. There hasn't been a lot of disagreement with the study's findings or recommendations, other than how do you do that? And so the question that we're now asking is, okay, how do we do that? And so what S13 does is it creates a task force to basically design an implementation plan of the recommendations of the study that was done 2 years ago. And it's a task force of legislators and Secretary of Education and the chair of the Board of Education. We did not put in the other cast of characters like the school board and the superintendents, and they didn't want to be on it because they felt like their role was to provide us information and not be part of this deciding body. This task force will also hire a consultant that will help the committee with the data and the analysis, because there's going to be new modeling and things that are going to be needed. And it'll work to ensure that all public school students have this equitable access to education, and that we're accurately accounting for the actual costs. And that includes a new weighting category that the study came out about rurality, or like the geographical remoteness of the school. And we're requiring to meet up to 12 times and do public hearings and come back to the legislature with this implementation plan of the recommendations from the study. And there's language in the bill that says, you know, it's our intent that the next legislative body, or just us, because it's just next year, so it's this current body, will implement this. We'll take it up and put it into law. So that's the thumbnail sketch of what it is. I'm happy to go into more detail, but that's what it is. And I invite the others that have spent time on this to weigh in if they think I've missed anything important.
That would be great. Just before I go to Senator White, are any of the senators, Hardy, Baruth, or Campion, wanting to add anything?
I think I would just add, first of all, I thought that was a great overview. There are some questions that have been raised by colleagues and constituents. I want to thank Senator Hardy and Senator Ballin for gathering and coming up with those questions. And, you know, again, we are taking a step toward implementation. It would still take a legislative action, but this, I think, these are questions that we would have to hammer out on the floor or in other discussions. So I appreciate everybody's work on this, and I think it's a good next step. So I'll leave it there.
And Senator Baruth?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the committee and Senator Campion. This is one of those issues, maybe like the one we just discussed, where it's easiest to put it to one side and not deal with it. The problem with that is that the report from UVM made it amply clear that the state not only is underfunding rural districts and English language learner districts and districts with high poverty, but the state has now been officially notified of that by our own study. And so we are at some legal if we don't act. So I was very pleased to see the committee quickly work on this and come up with a solution. The solution we had been considering last year was having AOE do this prep work, but with the pandemic, they are completely flooded with other things, understandably. So I applaud the committee's ingenuity in figuring out a way to get this work done. So I, again, thank them.
Great. And I think I see some questions. Senator Hardy, you didn't want to add anything, did you?
No, I think it looks great, and just add my thanks to the committee for getting this bill out.
Great. So I think we have a question from Senator White.
Thanks. Andy, I may have missed this. Was distracted here for a minute, but the report is due back next year, and then and it's an implementation plan. It's what the report is. Is there a deadline in that requirement for a plan for when it needs to be implemented? I mean, could they come back with an implementation plan that says by the year 2028 we'll have implemented it?
There is not a deadline. There's the deadline to have the plan done, and then we say that the committees will take it up. I think we felt like we couldn't force them to pass it, obviously. So it just says that it's our intent that they will pass it and that they will take it up during the second year of this biennium. But no, there isn't a specific date for which the implementation will take. And I think one of the reasons, at least from my thinking, why we couldn't have a deadline is that we might want to, it might be, parts of it might be kind of feathered in over a couple of years. But no, it isn't specifically, there's not a deadline.
So
if I could just add to that, Senator White, we know that I think it's on everybody's mind. This is a priority. And even if we were to put a date in, it would take legislative action to move that forward, even with a date. So we felt it was enough of a priority from Vermonters and certainly the Senate that it will be taken up upon our return.
Yeah, I wasn't worried about taking up the bill. I mean, the plan. I was worried about the plan saying we will implement step 1 in 2024 and we'll implement step 2 in 2028. We'll implement. So I wasn't worried about the committee taking up the bill.
Okay.
I was worried about the implementation plan. If there was some guidance about that they shouldn't be putting off the implementation for 10 years. If that makes any sense.
No, I think it makes sense. But no, we didn't do that. And there could be some complications if you just had a deadline, because is it the whole plan or parts of the plan? There might be parts that you do want a different date. It can get complicated.
I assume there'll be probably some pressure put on the committee to speed up the plan if it ends up being too far out.
I would think so, yeah.
And I think that'll be part of the the comments we'll get from the public and the local school boards and stuff saying, hey, we want an implementation plan that does this yesterday, not in 2020.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions on the waiting implementation plan task force? And just remind me, the deadline is December, January?
January 15th, 2022.
And I'll also just mention to colleagues, given that there's an appropriation in here, it was directed there today. So it'll come out sometime. It may be on the floor later this week or sometime next week.
Great. Okay. Anything else? I see nothing. The blind, your blind majority leader scanning. So we have had a request to discuss a bill that will be on the floor this week that addresses the Rygate plant. And so Senator McDonald, would you be kind enough to update us on that?
I will. The bill is up for action tomorrow on the calendar. Senators will remember that a year ago, or at least last September, there was a unanimous recommendation to extend the license for Rygate and the subsidy that accompanies that license for another 10 years. And essentially the same committee this year has come back and unanimously recommended that we extend the current license for 2 more years. And the caucus would ask, so what's changed? Why this different direction? Well, there are a couple of reasons. First, since the last year, the plant has sold to a new management, and the new company is a company that has purchased a bunch of older plants that use wood as part of their business model, and they're trying to repurpose them. It's a risky business. The plant has, I think, the owners have some successes and they have some shortcomings. And we in the Finance Committee thought that the best course of action would be to extend the license for 2 years. And it does not expire for another 1.5 years. So that's 3.5 years for the plant owners to come up with solutions that we could review. If we simply were to extend the license for 10 years, they would get the subsidy, the ratepayers would pick up the tab, they would not be obliged to make any changes for 10 years. The other thing that has changed is in this issue about forestry and foresters and people that work in the woods and have mortgages on their equipment, and that truck product to Rygate are in a much more desperate situation, both in New Hampshire and Vermont, than they were just a couple years ago. Several New Hampshire plants have closed. The government of New Hampshire has said it's not going to subsidize the logging industry, but this industry is both in Vermont and New Hampshire. We cannot simply extend the plant's operation in the hopes of protecting Vermont loggers in the absence of clear plan to set our subsidies, the people that work in this state, maintain our forests, and provide wood to this plant. And we did not want to extend the license and leave Vermont foresters in that industry alone with the New Hampshire people, and Rygate the only plant that was taking product. So tomorrow we'll go into a bit more detail, but the reason for a 2-year extension is because we're worried about our local foresters, loggers, and truckers, and we're trying to come up with a solution that protects them if and when the plant were to get a long-term deal. There are many reasons for not having the plant have a long-term deal, but the one issue that has persuaded us to go for 2 years plus the 1.5 years left is so that we can tackle and perhaps solve the problem that our Vermont foresters, loggers, and truckers have if that plant isn't open. So that's the short version of one of the details of the bill tomorrow, but I wanted senators to have a heads up to think of any questions. The bill and the finance amendment are on page 225, 325 of today's calendar. I think it's the first one. It's Senate 1 is the number of the bill, and the page number is there. If you have questions, think about them before the bill comes up, and I will try and answer them tomorrow. And that's the end of my appeal here.
And unless there are other, Jeanette, Senator White.
No, this wasn't a question on that. This was a different thing that I wanted to bring up.
Okay, so before we leave this, Senator McDonald, would you be kind of just for the big picture for our new senators? Rygate poses a challenge environmentally, but through its particulates that it discharges and the carbon emissions. Would you be kind of just in a nutshell, describe why Rygate is a bit of a challenge for the state to relicense for
Rygate was built 30 years ago as an experimental plant and subsidized by the state, which picked up much of its mortgage. And the purpose was to see if we could generate electricity with wood products and do it efficiently. At the end of 20 years, the answer was no. And Rygate applied for a 10-year extension of their subsidy. They invested a considerable amount of money in making their plant cleaner than it had previously been. But even today, the benefit of the wood chips to make electricity is only 23% efficient. Someone will ask, what the heck does that mean? If you were to burn the same number of wood chips to heat things, to heat buildings or downtowns, you can get up to 70% efficiency. The plant is still wood burner, and it's dirty, not as dirty as it used to be, but it puts a lot of particulates into the air. And the electricity that it produces costs more than we could buy on the open market by a number of $10 billion or more for our 10-year period. So why would you be running a dirty plant that isn't all that efficient, that costs more to operate, and it's being subsidized by other ratepayers? And the answer is, last year we agreed it was an economic development thing for our foresters and others who are struggling to pay their mortgages on their equipment. But now we've realized that they're competing with the New Hampshire loggers, and the market for these wood chips is we've been told that they believe they're producing the product and selling it at a loss, and this is untenable. And we're trying to find a way that we can use the heat, whether it's to do a shrimp farm or to hook up and make an agreement with pellet manufacturers to dry pellets, or any other innovative solution before we give them a 10-year deal. Right. And so we're giving them 3.5 years. If they come back and say, we need another year, I think we're very likely to say, we'll give you another year. You seem to be making progress. If they come back and say, we don't know what to do, we can't operate this plant, then it'll be a different unfortunate result. So, this gives us time to make an intelligent decision.
I think that's helpful. Senator White, you had something, because we need to end in a couple minutes.
I just was going to tell people that on today's calendar under S15, there was an amendment by Senator Parent, and he withdrew that and is going to come to the committee this afternoon. But I would encourage people to look at that very, very carefully. I was not part of the committee discussion last week, and my understanding from Anthony is that they did not take a vote on whether to support it or not. But it puts additional requirements on town clerks, and it also the study proposes to look at ways to increase the residents' access to statewide and local elections. That's listed as the purpose. But the only thrust of this is not how do we really make town meetings and other elections more participatory and get more people involved. But the only things are whether town meeting should be moved to a weekend or be made a holiday. And then all the other points have to do with potentially requiring the mailing out of Australian ballots. So it really is only about Australian ballots. And so I would just ask people to look at the amendment. Corey is going to come to our committee this after at 1:15 and tell us about it. And my understanding is that there might be a slight change. I don't know what that is. But I just wanted people to be aware that that will be coming up tomorrow, and there will be a roll call vote called on it.
Yes, for third reading, but yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean for this amendment.
Oh, okay.
And for the bill.
And I hope bill, it's one of our most, I mean, it's an important bill for this.
It is, and if we can have a roll call vote if we want, I'm happy to do that, but there will be one called for the amendment.
Got it. Okay, thank you. We have 2 minutes, Senator Bray.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up really briefly on what Senator McDonald was reporting out. I mean, the Rygate plant, it's a painful thing in a way to to extend its operation, because you burn 4 trees and 3 of them turn into heat. Only 1 of them turns into useful energy, and it does emit particulates. But I would say there's both a compassionate side and a practical side to why we're trying to find an off ramp to something that performs at a better level. One is that none of us want to be putting people out of work. And secondly, if the market for the low grade wood that comes out disappears entirely, then there'll be negative impacts on potential negative impacts on how logging is conducted. And I've talked to very experienced, I would say very progressive loggers with a very sound environmental ethic. And they have, encouraged us to make sure that we continue to find a viable way to do forestry that allows them to afford to be able to take out low grade wood, because you can improve a forest stand by removing low grade wood. And so we all hope for a better future, but it's, this is, I think, a very balanced and finessed way out of the current situation, which we all find ourselves in. And it's not a good situation. I don't believe we would ever build such a plant today.
No, we wouldn't, but hindsight's always 2020. Thank you all very much. Any additional questions you have on these subjects, you know who to go to. Have a great afternoon, and thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Blazing today.